thank you all for being here for our presentation on using PDS partnerships to encourage professional behaviors in college students. I'm Pam Schuetze. I am a faculty member in the psychology department at Buffalo State, but have been doing some work with some PDS partners for several years now. And I'm here with two of my co-presenters. Kathy, did you want to introduce yourself really quickly, and then maybe Denise?
Sure. Hi, I'm Kathy Doody. I'm working blindly. I can't see you, so hopefully this all works out well. I am a associate professor in the exceptional education department, and I've been working on service learning projects with Pam for the last 6 or 7 years.
Denise?
And hello, everyone. My name is Denise Harris. I am the director of the Career Development Center here at Buffalo State.
Great, thank you. And our other two presenters could not be here for a variety of reasons. So Katrina Fulcher-Rood, who is in the Speech and Language Pathology Department here at Buffalo State, and Pixita Del Prado, who many of you probably know and is busy with a lot of behind the scene things that are happening with the PDS conference today. So Kathy, thank you. So just a kind of a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to start by talking a little bit about what we mean when we talk about professional dispositions or professional behaviors and why we feel they're so important to be addressing explicitly with our college students. Denise is going to talk to us about some key partnerships. Then we're going to talk about the role of the instructor or the mentor or the leader, depending on where the professional behaviors are being taught. We're going to then talk about using applied learning as a platform for developing those behaviors in undergraduate students, because that's something that we've had some really great experiences doing over the past several years. And then hopefully, if we time it all well, we'll have a few minutes at the end for discussion and to answer any questions that you might have. All right, so I'm going to start by just kind of defining dispositions and talking a little bit about their importance. One of the things that's really interesting about professional dispositions is that there really are a lot of terms for it. And one of the things that we found is that different disciplines really have a different terminology for it. So we've heard professional dispositions, which I know is what the School of Education at Buffalo State uses. I'm in the psychology department, and psychologists talk about professional behaviors, but it also gets referred to as professionalism, student professionalism, and in Denise's world, she talks about career competencies. But what they all have in common is that they're talking about respect for others, about a commitment to the quality of the work that you do. That comes up frequently. Responsibility, and that's for the student, to themselves, to their classmates, to their instructor, as well as to any partners that they might be working with. Personal integrity and professional ethics. So across the board, we see those themes coming up over and over again, despite what we might call them. So, one of the things that we really wanted to talk about today was how we can use the college classroom and projects that are happening as part of the college classroom to really develop professionalism in our college students. One of the things that when we're teaching courses as faculty members in higher education, we often have really explicit goals for our students in terms of the type of knowledge that we want them to leave the classroom with, and maybe some specific skills that we really want them to gain as well. Professional behaviors and dispositions, though, is often a goal that we have, but we may not be as explicit with our students about that being a goal. So it's one of those, it's often kind of referred to as a hidden curriculum, right? We have these expectations for our students to use professional behaviors, but we don't always take the time to help them develop those behaviors. And we know that that's really, really important, because the social proficiency is critical for future careers. If one of the things that we did when we were preparing this presentation was to do a literature review to look at what employers in our various disciplines were looking for in our college students once they were entered the workforce. And this idea of this kind of social proficiency and the being able to interact professionally with employers and with clients comes up over and over again. So it's not just the academic successes that are important. We have to think about these professional behaviors that they're using as well. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about is that individual instructors and courses can have very specific needs and objectives in terms of teaching our students professional behaviors. We can put that in the syllabus, we can put it in other course documents, we can talk to our students about our expectations for how they can develop those professional behaviors. And that we need to, I think, be much more explicit maybe than we have always been in the past. And the other thing I think that's really important is to be aware that most disciplines, regardless of what discipline we're in, I'm in psychology, Katrina, who unfortunately not able to be here today, is in speech and language pathology. Kathy's in exceptional education. All of our disciplines have guidelines for the types of behaviors that our students should have as they enter the workforce. So I think it's really helpful and it's powerful to share those discipline-specific guidelines with our students. Okay, I'm going to turn things over to Kathy now.
So I'm not quite sure if our word cloud is generating here. We had asked you at the beginning, we did a poll and we asked you to list some words that you think define are critical for professional behaviors in work settings. Doesn't look like that's going to work. So we'll just move on and hopefully we'll be able to get that back at the end. And I'm going to turn it over to Denise for a minute to talk, well, a few minutes to talk about some of our key partnerships.
Absolutely. And I actually clicked the poll button in the chat on Whova. So if you were able to see, you could see the word cloud and some of the opportunities for it to pop up there. So I think you can see that, as Kathy was saying, some of these professional behaviors are shared among colleagues across discipline and even both on the faculty side as well as the student affairs side of the house where I am, which leads us into those key partnerships. It's so important that we understand that professionalism not only happens in the classrooms, outside of the classroom, and that applied professional learning is really paramount to a student's success. I think Pam said it great when she said, it's this hidden curriculum. We expect students to know that, but very rarely is it actually included. So it's so great to kind of look at these academic specific disciplines where it's in our code of ethics, where it's articulated in our outcomes, and it's highlighted in our course syllabus. But these opportunities do not happen in silos. And it's so important that we collaborate and we have developed strong partnerships, not only with career development centers or people like me that do career related type of connections, civic engagement offices or individuals in the community. There's a plethora of resources available for any faculty member or any school administrator or teacher that really wants to develop some strong relationships with the local community because they all need extra hands. It's a lot, it's a very interesting time right now in the hiring employment field where a lot of people are struggling. So volunteering or really having that classroom experience come to life. So we can also highlight something that's an objective in a syllabus, but also so we can kind of key in on some of those professional dispositions. The local employment community is definitely there. And again, all of us can be connected to work together to develop these skills that our students so desperately need. And as the next slide will show, you can see that, yes, these students need them, but also employers are specifically looking for them. And NACE, which is the National Association of Colleges and Employers, presents a survey every single year for employees. And even though these fluctuate pretty much every year, the top 10 usually stay pretty consistent. The percentages on the right may change slightly, but overall you will see the individual competencies that employers are specifically looking for on a resume. And even though we know a resume is a very fluid and working document, I'm also going to expand this out to interviewing, LinkedIn profiles. They're key terms that applicant tracking software is looking for. So having this classroom professional idea come to life is not only going to help them personally, but also professionally, and is being specifically sought out on applicants' resumes. And some of the consistencies that you're going to see, and some of the ones that pop up all the time, obviously, are leadership, communication, interpersonal skills, ability to solve problems and work in a team. These projects that we're going to talk about, applied learning experiences, all give these students not only a strong theoretical framework, but also their reality coming to life. The next slide, you will see that, again, it's important on a resume, but it's also an advantage in a job market. We work with a lot of students that unfortunately sometimes can't accept an unpaid internship. So sometimes these types of applied learning experiences aren't necessarily relevant or even an opportunity for our students. So when they're embedded in the curriculum and applied and supported and specifically articulated, we know that this is going to be an advantage in the world of work. So again, as partnerships continue to grow, as people are realizing that there's this need, we also know that the job market is looking for this. And this is one, again, of the indicators in the employment market. So you can see on this list, again, leadership is popping up. We know major is important. We know specific tangible skills are important. We know GPA is important. But again, it's those experiences or those applied learning opportunities that students can grow from, learn from, and articulate during these employment kind of opportunities. Specifically NACE, as I mentioned before, in our world, it's called career readiness competencies. Again, very similar. You will see these consistent terms, but again, you will see the same terms pop up: leadership, teamwork, critical thinking, communication, career and self-development. So again, just reiterating the fact that these competencies are not going away anytime soon. They're consistently relevant in the co-curricular and the curricular side of the house, and that we're all being very mindful of including these into academic experiences. And then the last slide that I'll be addressing will be the disciplinary code of conducts. As Pam said, through the literature review, we were able to see also code of ethics for each of the departments that we're kind of in right now: psychology, education, speech language pathology. You will see that these are specifically identified skills that we're looking for our graduates to obtain when they leave us and go out into the professional world. So again, responsibility, collaboration, communication, and that overarching theme of respect, which is what all of our students gain from these really real world work experiences.
Great, thanks, Denise. So as Pam mentioned when she outlined the agenda for today, I'll be talking about the individual roles that each player has as part of their responsibility in this mentoringship project. So the instructor, the mentor, and the students. So what role does everybody play? Well, we want to make sure that our students have a clear understanding of expectations. And there are a couple of ways we can do that. We can verbally talk about it. We can show them some videos of what professional behavior looks like. We can show them some pictures of what professional dress looks like, what it doesn't look like. But many students really just haven't developed those professional dispositions or behaviors incidentally, just by observation alone. And we need to explicitly teach them, as Pam mentioned before. So the role of the instructor, let me just get my whole slide up here. So the role of the instructor is really to help guide the student through this experience. So we want to make sure that they have a clear understanding of the expectations. We want them to have multiple opportunities for them to practice in real world authentic situations. And that's one of the hallmarks of applied learning is you take what you learn in a classroom and then you go out and you use it with real people in real settings and real situations. A big part of our applied learning project was a self-reflective part. So not only did we want our students to gain some skills, practical skills that they could use today, but also in the future in the workplace, but we also wanted them to reflect upon what they've learned. And then we also wanted to make sure that we were providing students with very regular feedback on their behavior, which was also a component of our applied learning project. So if you wanted to start something like this yourself, where would you start? First thing, identify the dispositions that you feel are important, perhaps in your own particular discipline, in your own geographical area, within the culture of the population that you're working. What do you feel are the important key dispositions for your students to have? And then put those dispositions in writing so that they're outlined clearly and articulately and in a permanent way that students can refer back to. discuss those dispositions in class, generate some discussion, small group discussion, think, pair, share, so that students have a chance to really dig a little bit deeper into these dispositions and kind of really make them their own. And then integrate those dispositions throughout the course and or their academic programs. So it isn't just an isolated, we're going to talk about it for 20 minutes in my class, but what do these dispositions really look like for you as a student, for you as someone out in your community, for you as a potential part of our workplace? And then we always want to provide students feedback with their performance. And, very often we provide critical feedback. We very often as a teacher, this is a pet peeve of mine, we don't recognize and catch the students being good. So not only should we be providing feedback, critical feedback, when we think there's something that might need a little bit of improvement, but when a student really just hits our expectations and does what we expect them to do, we really need to acknowledge that as well, and let the student know that we feel that they've been listening, and that they've really taken that feedback we've given them to heart. So identify dispositions. As Pam and Denise both said, we certainly have a lot of common themes that we'll see across dispositions, but we will very often see them referred to with different terminology. So a professional literature review, or go to an accrediting body and look to see what are considered to be the essential dispositions in your field. So very often it's a code of conduct, a code of ethics, professional dispositions, standards. The terminologies may change, but they're really all getting to the same root cause, the same important information. And then which of those dispositions should we really focus on in the particular course that we're teaching? We want to look at our course SLOs, our short-term objectives, our content, and what aligns well, which of those dispositions really aligns well to our course content. Then we also want to consider the professional context as well. So for a particular applied learning project that Pam, Katrina, and I did, our students were going to be assessing very, very young children in daycare settings. So they're most likely going to be on the floor. They might be a little bit dirty. They might have a child, wipe their hands on them. They may have a child sneeze on them. So we certainly want children to look at us as non-threatening and non-intimidating, but we still want to look professional and put together as well. So, what does that mean? That means, nice jeans, or professional looking clothes that aren't a suit and high heels, but are still giving that professional polished look, while being able to sit down on the floor and play Play-Doh with a child. Putting those professional dispositions in a handbook, and this is where we really need a shout out to Pam. She was the one that decided that we just had little bits and pieces of what we were expecting here and there, and she pulled it all together into a really comprehensive handbook that I know she's willing to share with people because she shared it with others in the past. And this handbook really nicely outlined everything we wanted the students to know. We wanted them to introduce themselves, how we wanted them to introduce themselves, what kind of ID they needed to show when they arrived at the site, where they should be parking, who they should contact if they had a question, how they should contact someone. And so everything was very comprehensive, very clearly articulated in one place. So that handbook was a huge asset to our project. And it also included a list of the dispositions we were looking for with some descriptions, which was really helpful. We also want to talk about those dispositions in our classroom, as I've mentioned. So come up with some discussions, some hands-on activities where students can get together and talk about their dispositions. Pre-COVID, when we were allowed to do these things, Katrina, Pam, and I hosted a pizza party over in Bulger, and we bought a bunch of pizza and some snacks, and we had students from different disciplines get together and talk and introduce themselves to each other. But we really wanted them to share what they were expecting out of this experience and what those professional dispositions would look like and how they were expected to implement those professional dispositions. We also wanted to talk about why we had professional dispositions in this project, why they're important to us, as why they're important to students, and also why they're important to the profession as well. And we also stated the specific dispositions that we had for our particular project, again, which was assessing very young children in childcare settings. We discussed models, examples, and non-examples, particularly of dress. And Katrina, Pam, and I always kind of laugh about this because some of our non-examples we looked back on after the moment had passed and had a good chuckle about them. But in the moment, some of them were a little embarrassing, and we realized again, this was pre-handbook, that we had not done a very good job in explicitly stating to our students how they should be dressed, what they should be wearing, what was acceptable and what was not. So the examples and the non-examples. And then we wanted some activities for students to engage in, again, just to really help them become vested in what we were asking them to do, to make some connections to their day-to-day life, and to really kind of take ownership of these professional dispositions. Then we wanted to integrate these dispositions throughout our course. So as instructors, it was important for us to model these dispositions through our own behavior, and we were able to do that when we were all together. For example, the pizza party that we had, we all kind of took turns in taking the lead, leading the discussion, while the other two would support the discussion. So we were very collaborative because we wanted to model what we were expecting our students to then do when they were in groups out in the community conducting these assessments. We wanted our students to make planned connections, so very thoughtful, deliberate connections, and think about how their behavior impacted others. We had activities throughout the course that focused on dispositions. We also talked about those unplanned connections, so some things that happened that popped up. Well, let's talk about how we could have handled this. One of my students came to class and said that she had gone out into the field with 2 partners to do an assessment, and she was the only one that had a pen. And so we talked about, okay, so how could you have handled that? What could you have said in the moment? What could you have said after the moment? Perhaps what could you have said to your partners before the assessment to remind them of what it was that they needed? So those teachable moments. My students were the oldest in this applied learning project, so they were graduate students. Pam's students and Katrina's are undergraduate students, and I'll talk about this in a minute. So my students really took on a leadership role. They were all working in the field already, and so we expected them to kind of be that model of good behavior. And as we said, we addressed examples and non-examples both. And then that student feedback on performance was so critical. So we gave very intentional feedback to our students and very specific feedback. We wanted them to have some concrete examples of what it was that we were expecting them to do and what they should avoid doing. So we wanted to make sure that that was all very clearly defined. And we had all sorts of different types of feedback. So we had informal discussions in class. We had formal discussions in class. Pam, Katrina, and I were in contact all the time. And if one of our students raised a point, we would all make sure that we shared that with our students during class. We had some written activities that Katrina developed that I'll talk about in a minute. And we had some formal and informal self-reflective questions. So how does this all fall into the context of developing behavioralism? Professionalism, sorry, not behavioralism, professionalism. So as I mentioned, Katrina had created some really nice team collaboration models. I actually use it with my students now in a completely different class, in a different context, but just because they're all really well done. So they're modules that the students can complete online that ask them to really reflect upon their own conflict resolution, their personality, their communication style, to see, to let them really kind of get a deep dive into how they behave in certain situations, and then reflect upon that behavior. Could I have handled that situation a little bit differently? Is my communication as clear as I would like it to be? Is my personality, if I'm very outgoing and extroverted, how do I then complement somebody who's introverted and a little bit quieter? So how can I use these strengths in my personality to complement a group setting? So we had all of these students complete these modules, and then we got them together to talk in smaller groups, and we also individualized our feedback to each of them as instructors. So the service learning project, as I mentioned, that we had put together involved having our students go out into the community to conduct some assessments on very young children. And we had very structured reflection questions that we asked them to complete. So the 3 of us use the same core reflection questions, but sometimes we would tweak them a little bit to make them individualized for our own particular discipline. But you can see here, I won't read them, but some examples of some of the questions that we asked. We had students keep kind of an ongoing journal, although we had 3 or 4 different checkpoints during the semester where we did ask them to stop and reflect, write down their thoughts, and submit them to us. And we had some really rich comments that came out of that. In terms of the data collection, I'm going to turn it over to Pam to talk about that.
Great, thank you, Kathy. So one of the things that we have done with this project since its inception is collected lots and lots of data. And we have some surveys that we have kept from the very beginning. And those have been in the form of both pre and post project. So they're relatively short, but we kept the same questions. And we'd ask students to complete it before they begin the project. And then again, towards the end of the semester after they completed the project. And we have that for going on 6 or 7 years now. So we have lots of data there. And then in addition to that, each year we kind of have a new focus for the project, something that and it's often in response to a need that we have identified, usually because something hasn't gone particularly well. And as you know, Kathy kind of mentioned, we've had some really interesting experiences in the past with students, particularly in terms of dress, because maybe we weren't as explicit as we could have been with what they needed to wear. So this past, I guess, 2020, our goal had been to really focus on developing these professional behaviors with our students. And we, so Kathy talked about the handbook that we developed. We had lots of in-class activities, discussions. I had my students doing a little role modeling about how you introduce yourself to your community partner, how you thank them. Again, things that in the past, maybe I took for granted that they would just know how to do. And of course, some students did, but others really benefited from that kind of role modeling in the classroom. So we had really focused, set aside 2020. It was the spring semester of 2020. Well, we all know what happened in the spring of 2020. We got about halfway through the project. About half of our students had gone out and done their service learning at their PDS site and were set, and about half had not. So, we have a little bit of data that is actually useful from that spring, but unfortunately, because so many of our students were not able to really complete the project in its original form, we did modify things, but it was quite different in some ways in terms of at least the community partner role. So that's something I think we're going to kind of look forward. This project is something that we do every spring. Obviously last spring we were all online again, so we really couldn't continue to collect all these data on professionalism, but I think in the spring that will be something that we will continue to do, because we really do think it's important, and we really are pretty invested in helping our students to develop in this area. But we do have a little bit of data. So I want to share what we do have, because what we do have is really promising. So we collected both quantitative data. That's my area of expertise, in the form of basically rating scales, where we ask students to rate how they felt on a variety of skills, again, both pre and post project. And pretty consistently, we see significant increases in students' comfort levels and working with children and working with partners, and in just being able to do the kind of work that we're asking them to do. So we're really, really pleased with that piece of it. We've also collected quite a bit of qualitative data, and this is really Katrina's primary area of expertise. And so I hope that in her absence, I'm doing her work justice. But she culled a lot of these data from a lot of the reflections and the journaling that we had our students do at various points during the project, both before the project, after training, after the project itself was done, and then again at the end of the semester, after they have had lots of opportunities to think about how the project went, to have discussions in class, and to kind of really reflect on what they felt they gained during this project. So Katrina spent a lot of time going through those reflections. Kathy and I we got the reflections from our students and sent them on to Katrina. And she went through them, and what she was able to pull out of them is some really interesting themes that have to do with professionalism. One was that students felt like they had gained significant skills in terms of how to collaborate, which we felt really good about, because we have them in groups of these interdisciplinary groups of students from exceptional ed, students from speech language pathology and psychology, and we really wanted them to collaborate. We spent a lot of time talking about how important it was to collaborate in the field of providing young children with early intervention, that was a key component of what professionals do. And so we felt it was really important. So you can see here that students, particular in speech language pathology and exceptional education, specifically noted that they had gained really important skills in collaborating. Fewer of my students noted it. My students also tended to be among the youngest and the least experienced of all of the students going into this project. In terms of, in psychology, there's so many different careers that my students go into, and not all of them are really even interested in working with children. Whereas in both Katrina and Kathy's classes, they're much more likely to want to do that based on the nature of the classes that they're taking and their discipline. But we also noted that students, and these are all comments that students spontaneously expressed. So we weren't specifically asking them about collaboration or about working with children. We were just asking them in general, what did they feel like they gained from this project? So collaboration, working with children was something that came up frequently, particularly in speech and language pathology, but also about a quarter of my students. What to expect in their future profession. They felt like they had gained some really important skills in that, which we think is great, because one of the things that we talk to our students about is that we are trying to prepare them for careers, not just trying to give them more knowledge in the field. How to screen, and this is how to screen young children. That was obviously the major goal of this project. So that came up as another kind of theme. And then what working in school would be like. A number of the students felt like they really had a better sense of what a career in a school setting might look like if they chose to go in that particular direction. So, so we're looking forward to seeing what else comes out as we're able to collect more both pre and post data in a semester where, fingers crossed, we can actually complete the project in the community the way we had originally intended with all of our students. But we were really feeling encouraged, like among the small group of students that were able to go out into the community and work with their partners, they really did feel like they had gained some significant skills in terms of preparing them for potential careers. So with that, I'm checking the time. We have actually a fair amount of time for some discussion. And I just want to kind of give some final thoughts, and then maybe I'll turn it over to my collaborators too. But I feel like PDS has kind of been an ideal partnership for providing students with lots of opportunities to really develop these professionalisms. I think these partnerships that we have with the community are incredibly important for our students, because as Denise mentioned, many of our students can't do long-term unpaid internships. So this is their opportunity to really develop some important skills and to really to become kind of emerging professionals. And the PDS partnerships we have really been a wonderful way of supporting our students in kind of a really supportive context. Denise,
and I just want to quickly add, we gave such a broad overview of this project, but it is something we've been doing for 7 or 8 years now. And as Pam mentioned, we have reams of data. But one of the original intents of this project was to reflect, to teach students explicitly in each of our fields how to collaborate with each other, because psychologists, teachers, and speech language pathologists very often end up working on the same team in a school. And what we found was that they really had very little understanding of what the other professional did, what their roles were, and how they could come together in a complementary way on a team and collaborate for the good of the student, for the good of the child. So one of the things that we also talked about is just respecting someone with a different skill set than yours, someone with a different training, with a different background than yours. And I know I explicitly tell my students this all the time, but like, pick the brains of those people, because their training is so different from yours. And that's a good thing, because there's so much you can learn from them. And as a practitioner myself, when I was a teacher, I would just sit back and watch those psychologists go, or watch that speech language pathologist in a therapy session, and learn as much as I could, so that I could then turn around and incorporate those skills into my practice. And that's really what we wanted our students to take away. One of the many things we wanted our students to take away from this project was how can we learn from each other in a professional way in other disciplines. And I'm looking through the list of participants, and I do see that we have so many of our PDS partners here who are represented, who are currently working in a school. So I might put some of you on the spot a little bit. So Jessica or Heather, I know that you're both administrators in schools, and I'm wondering if you might be willing to share, maybe Jessica first, and then Heather, some of the professional dispositions that you find desirable candidate. Thank you for letting me put you on the spot. So I think, I'm not sure if you're speaking or not. Is Jessica here? I thought I saw her name.
Was, but it looks like maybe she just had to leave.
Okay, so maybe we'll have you go, Heather. Thanks so much for being a good sport.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay. I should start by saying that Jessica and I are not related. We have almost the same last name. I want to say thank you for doing this work and bringing attention to these dispositions and professionalism for our candidates. I was actually here at the Student Union several years ago, and I was on a panel talking to a room full of teacher candidates about hiring and things like that, what people look for. And I was like, if you're sitting in this audience and you are not dressed like you would be dressed in the classroom, you have missed an opportunity, because I'm here. People like me are here, and we want to see you, not how we would bump into you at the grocery store, but how we would bump into you in the hallway or your classroom. And so what you're talking about is really important. The word that I put for the poll, I put dependability, but it's only because I couldn't go back. That was my first thought, and I couldn't go back and change it. I would have changed it to integrity if I could have. Both are important, but you got to show up to work. So that's the dependability part. And I know that seems so basic, but sometimes it's not. But then when you show up, you have to be more than just physically there. You have to show up with your whole self, and be somebody who teaches as though your own children were in your classroom. Actually, I probably would be, I need other people's children to be my best. I'm not always at my best with my own. So, you all know what I mean, if you're moms. But the idea of teaching kids the way you would want somebody to teach your own children is really important. And I know that wearing jeans doesn't make or break what your instruction looks like or what your curriculum is or any of that stuff, but it's how you present yourself. And I think I maybe I'm old at this point, but it really does matter to me. And I also just want to talk about, in terms of disposition, two more things: the ability to collaborate with others, meaning to both listen and contribute. That level of reciprocity is critical. And then be willing to take risks and love your job. So teachers who disengage have kids who disengage. So
I just have to say, Heather, I was in the student union a few years ago when you were part of that panel discussion.
Oh, really?
And I was. And what you said resonated with a lot of our students because they repeated some of your words to me afterwards. And I don't know if you remember exactly what you said, but you paraphrased it really well here when you said you've just missed an opportunity. If you're sitting in this room and if you're wearing flip-flops and a tank top with spaghetti straps, you've actually just missed an opportunity to make a good impression upon me and my peers, the administrators who actually do the hiring in schools. And then you also went on about a little story about how visible a candidate always is, from the minute they walk into the office for a job interview, how they address the secretary in the office, what they do when they're sitting before they wait to come into your office for the interview, how they treat people around them. And you basically said from the minute you set foot in that school, your interview has started, whether you realize that or not. I see Denise nodding her head up and down. So your words then, Heather, as now, were very powerful, and they were years ago. And I was an adult faculty member sitting in the office, and you made an impression, sitting in the audience, and you made an impression on me too.
Oh my gosh, that is, thank you very much. That's very flattering. Thank you.
I just want to jump in too and say that I just love that you brought up both integrity and kind of the love for your job. I think one of the things that I try to impress on my students, and I don't know, you never know, are they listening or are they just rolling their eyes? But I tell them that I don't want them going into this field if they don't have a passion for improving the lives of children. Because I think that's the bottom line. And if that's not there, then psychology has lots of other options. Explore those. And I think that's really important. That I think it's great that they hear that from employers as well.
I'll just jump in here real quick too. And I just wanted to lift up my colleagues. And one of the reasons why I was so honored to be on this panel is because, when students hear it from me, the career director, I think it's one thing, but when professors say it and it's resonated by superintendents and teachers and administrators in schools, it's a consistent message that we're all here to help you develop these skills. And one of the reasons why I love the work that my colleagues are doing here at Buffalo State is because some students just don't know what even professional dress is. So the fact that we're teaching students how to do this, we're teaching them because some students just think nice jeans and a tank top is okay. And by us saying, actually, this is what professional dress looks like, and giving them a visual example of it, we're setting them up for success. We're not getting frustrated or aggravated. We're actually just saying to them, let me help you. Let me show you. Let me show you where to shop, how to go. Because again, sometimes they're just not, either, budgeting is tough, or the opportunities to actually get these types of physical items is just a challenge. And so I am so proud of Buffalo State for breaking down those barriers and trying to give students an advantage, because it legitimately is the hidden curriculum. And now we have kind of like peeled back the onion and kind of made this mystical world of professionalism not so mystical and really tangible for them, which I think is so important for students nowadays.
Yeah, very well said, Denise. And I'm glad you brought up the topic of maybe having the financial resources to buy clothes. And I'm going to give a shout out to two people that are on this panel right now in the audience. So Cece Zagarigo and Tamara both were instrumental in creating the School of Education closet. So we have a closet full of professional clothing that student teachers and teachers can wear when they go out into field placements. And those clothes are very appropriate and clean and very, very gently used, if used at all. And so it was a huge asset to our School of Education community that now students who might have felt a little self-conscious about perhaps not having the money to go out and buy new clothes when they went out on a field placement, they had a way to meet their needs. So thank you to Cece and Tamara both for your efforts there. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to mention that as well, and encourage all of you to encourage any of your teacher candidates to reach out to me if they would like to get in and do some shopping.
Yeah, and Cece also tells her students something that I think is very powerful. And she talks about students maybe in private schools or charter schools who are required to wear a uniform, and maybe they wear navy blue pants and a white polo shirt every day, and that's what they're supposed to wear as their school mandates it. Cece always suggests to student teachers, you can wear a school uniform too. So you can get a nice pair of black pants and a white shirt and tell your students that this is your school uniform, and you can wear the same thing to school every single day. And not only does it show them that you have solidarity with them, but it allows you to look professional on a very limited budget. And it's a great suggestion. I don't know if you're still here, Cece, but you always have good ideas.
Well, I think we're at our time, but I just want to offer, if anybody has any questions or wants to talk about this further, just to reach out to any of us. I think we'd all be more than happy to kind of continue the conversation at any point.
Thank you all. Thank you, panelists, and thank you everyone for coming to the conference and to this presentation.